You're watching Football Daily, and here's our list of 10 clubs that went bankrupt. 10. Chelsea. Long before the days of Russian oil tycoons and the special ones' touchline antics, Chelsea were a very different beast. In fact, in the 1980s, the beast, maimed by financial mismanagement, was very nearly put down. A key player in the club's poor fortunes around this time was chairman Joseph Brian Mears, who was doing his best to dismantle the club his grandfather had helped found. Although his stewardship had begun well, winning the FA Cup and the Cup Winners' Cup in consecutive seasons, the plans to redevelop Stamford Bridge proved disastrous for the club's coffers. And with the side in a perilous position on and off the pitch, the rest of the board members, led by the aptly named Viscount Chelsea, revolted against Mears, forcing him out. Ultimately, Ken Bates would buy Chelsea for £1 in 1982 and immediately set about transforming the club into Division 1 regulars, securing Stamford Bridge from the clutches of property developers in the process. He later sold the business for £30 million, whilst Mears, who he once described as a very weak man, ran a car dealership in Long Beach, California. 9. Rapid Bucharest. The Romanian club was founded in 1923 by railway workers and within 10 years had developed into one of the country's elite teams, winning the Cupa Romaniei an impressive 5 times in the 1930s. Despite their prolific record in cup competitions, they had to wait until 1966-1967 season for their first taste of domestic success, when they pipped fierce rivals Dynamo Bucharest to the title by just 2 points. Fast forward 32 tumultuous years, which included a 6-year stint outside the top flight, and Rapid once again were the top dogs of Romanian football, spearheaded by the deadly partnership of Ghenea and Barbu, who scored 49 league goals between them that season. Their third and final title win came in the 2002-2003 season, but just 10 years on, the club found itself in €4 million worth of debt, eventually filing for liquidation and being declared bankrupt by the Romanian court. The Burgundy Eagles, who played in the Champions League quarter-finals as late as 2006, have now reformed as AFC Rapid Bucharesti in the country's 5th division. That's what you get for not paying the tax man. 8. Leeds. At number 8 is Yorkshire's most mismanaged club. Yep, it's Leeds United. The 3 times champions of England were thrown into crisis in the early 2000s, following the club's reckless spending policy under chairman Peter Ridsdale. One move that became emblematic of this turbulent period was Seth Johnson's £10 million switch from Derby. Not only did Ridsdale overpay for the industrious but limited midfielder, but he also offered him 37 grand a week, almost triple what Johnson was prepared to accept. It's thanks to contract negotiations like this that Ridsdale became known as Father Christmas amongst football agents. Although bizarrely, this isn't the most farcical legacy that Ridsdale left behind. When the new chairman, John McKenzie, came in to deal with the impending shitstorm, he found an invoice for £120 relating to goldfish the former chairman was renting for his office. Yes, you heard us right. Renting. By the time Ridsdale and his parasitic board had resigned, the club were in £79 million worth of debt, and the Ellen Road faithful went from watching Champions League to League One in just 6 years. 7. Darlington. At number 7 is a club who never sampled the dizzying heights of League One football before their eventual demise. In fact, Darlington's highest ever finish in the English pyramid was 15th in the old 2nd division circa 1926. However, they feature so prominently on our list because they entered administration not once, not twice, but 3 times in the space of 10 years, with their financial ineptitude eventually costing them big. Once a formidable force in England's lower leagues, the Quakers eventually bit off more than they could chew, when chairman George Reynolds moved the club into the Reynolds Arena in 2003, an £18 million 25,000-seater built on high-interest loans with no realistic ambitions of filling it on a weekly basis. In fact, their record attendance still stands at 11,600 and declined exponentially thereafter. After changing ownership several times, the side entered administration for the last time in 2012, when the club was dissolved. They have now reformed under community ownership as Darlington 1883. 6. Rangers. One name that fills the green side of Glasgow with glee and the blue side with gut-wrenching dread is Craig White. A lifelong Rangers supporter and once Scotland's youngest ever millionaire, White was a chancer long before his ill-fated spell at the world's most trophy-laden club. After venturing away from the family business in 1990, his first company went bankrupt before eventually bouncing back in other dealings. Unperturbed by his past failings, White set about buying his boyhood team, and the move materialised quickly. In May 2011, Sir David Murray sold his 85.3% stake to the venture capitalist, with former manager Walter Smith welcoming it as an era of stability. However, it was later uncovered in a BBC documentary that White and a business partner had seemingly falsified documents at a past company in order to hike up the prices of their shares, basically making him a con man. A subsequent investigation by the Scottish Football Association, quick as ever on the uptake, deemed him not fit and proper to own a football club, and on the 14th of February 2012, Rangers entered administration. The fallout was not good for White. Ticket US, the company who lent him a cool £25 million to buy the club, successfully sued him. He was banned from being a director of any company for 15 years and was forced to declare bankruptcy. Oh, and let's not forget, he also had to sell his castle. I mean, the man really did have delusions of grandeur, didn't he? All in all, you probably should have remained just a fan, Mr. White, instead of leaving a permanent blemish on one of Scotland's most enduring clubs. 5. Wimbledon. Now for a club who heroically rose from the bottom to the top, and then tragically fell to the bottom once again. Wimbledon were a staple of England's non-professional leagues before finally being promoted to Division 4, now League 2, in 1978. Within 10 years, they climbed their way to the top flight, and by the summer of 1988 had overcome the almighty Liverpool at Wembley to lift the FA Cup. The Dons held their own in England's top division for 14 years, and even saw in the Premier League era in the 90s. But trouble was not far around the corner, and things came to a head following their relegation in 2000. Within 1 year, the club's Norwegian owners appointed a new chairman, Charles Koppel, who announced the club would have to relocate to Milton Keynes or go out of business. Although the Football League initially refused the plans, they eventually went through, and by 2002, Wimbledon fans had lost their club altogether. 4. Fiorentina. La Viola are a club steeped in history, taking home Serie A titles in 1955 and 68, but from 1970 until 2000, Fiorentina found their true calling: mid-table mediocrity. That would surely all change though, when Italian legend Roberto Mancini took charge in 2001, following the resignation of Fatih Terim. But as ever, the club put together their standard operation and climbed to an eye-watering 9th. But it was off the pitch that there were serious problems, and the club's finances were in dire straits. Behind the scenes, the board had driven debts up to around $50 million, and La Viola were even unable to pay players' wages towards the back end of 2001. In 2002, things went from bad to worse, as the side were relegated from Serie A and eventually placed into administration in June. This ruling also had a further catastrophic impact on the pitch, as the side were refused a place in Serie B in 2002 to 2003 because of financial issues. Because of this, the side effectively ceased to exist, and the club's owner, Chechi Gori, was even investigated for money laundering. In fact, in July, police raided his home and found hidden stashes of cocaine and illegal cash. Thankfully, the club was reformed under shoe and leather entrepreneur Diego Dallaval in Serie B, but it took just 2 years for them to return to their proper home. Yep, you guessed it, mid-table Serie A. 3. Portsmouth. Portsmouth's fall from grace was nothing short of extraordinary. After winning the FA Cup in 2008, half a decade later, they were lingering in League 2 and haven't moved since. Punching above their weight in the late 2000s, they accomplished consistent Premier League football due to paying high wages for good Premier League players, and as a result got in a mess financially. But it wasn't all bad, as Al Fahim seemed to be the saviour, as the Emirati businessman was set to take over at the club. His buyout failed to materialise though, and the South Coast side plunged into administration. The likes of Crouch, Distan and Nico Croucher had to be sold at the end of the 08-09 season, leaving Pompey with a quite frankly terrible squad at the start of the next campaign. Balram Chanrai took over, but he failed to claw them out of administration, meaning they were deducted 9 points in the league and at long last were finally relegated. But somehow, despite having a side containing Jamie O'Hara and a 34-year-old, yeah, we say 34, more like 44-year-old Carnu, they managed to reach the FA Cup final. Unfortunately, Pompey lost to Chelsea in the final and were denied a Europa League spot due to their terrible financial state. Since then, and after years of uncertainty, Portsmouth are now owned by the fans, and things are looking on the up as they're currently challenging for promotion. 2. Coventry. In second place, we have one of the latest English clubs to face financial collapse. Like Wimbledon, Coventry had their glory in the late 1980s, as they led the way for English football by converting their Highfield Road home into an all-seater stadium, and achieving FA Cup glory in 1987. But the once majestic Midlands club have become a shadow of their former selves since dropping out of the Premier League in 2001. In 2005, they moved to their shiny new Ricoh Arena, but their financial insecurity meant they couldn't buy the stadium and had to rent it instead for £1.3 million a year. A situation like this was always doomed to failure, and in 2013 the club were forced to leave the Ricoh and ground share at Northampton's relatively tiny Sixfields. If that wasn't enough, the club were deducted 10 points for the second time in 6 months, after they were plunged into liquidation. The club have since moved back to the Ricoh, but their financial struggles continued, and victory in the 2017 EFL Trophy did little to paper over the cracks between the club, its fans, and its empty pockets. 1. Parma. The most well-known bankruptcy story in football unsurprisingly comes from Italy once again, and yep, you've guessed it, it's Parma. The club have a long and shambolic history of financial instability. In fact, it all started in 1986 when they were first liquidated, but this wouldn't be the last time it happened to the Crusaders. After their initial insolvency, the club rose up the Italian league, winning 2 UEFA Cups as well in 1994 and 1999, with one of Italy's greatest squads, featuring Buffon, Thuram, Cannavaro, Veron and Crespo. That success didn't last though, and again they went into administration, this time for 3 years in 2004, following the financial meltdown of Italian food giant Parmalat. They were reformed again though, and actually managed to reach the Europa League in 2014. But shock of shocks, they were barred from entering for financial reasons, and went bankrupt again in 2015, owing €218 million and not paying wages for nearly the entire season. But like Boris the Blade in Snatch, Parma are still refusing to die, and yet again in 2015, they were reborn. Who's doing the bankruptcy sweepstake this time? I'll take June 2019.
So we hope you enjoyed that, and if you want to check out more of our videos, then click here on screen. Don't forget to like and subscribe and get on our Snapchat and our Twitter.